Well, good afternoon. I suggest that we get started. It's a real pleasure to have so many people coming in the midsummer, right at the summer solstice. So it shows a particular interest, we think, in the issues of conflict resolution, but also in Buddhist approaches, which I think we hear too little about in Washington. So hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation. I'm Katherine Marshall. I'm a longtime senior fellow at the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. So welcome to the center. This is a rather special institution. We've just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and it's a multidisciplinary, multi-religious, multi-sectoral institution that reports to the president of Georgetown University because it brings together so many different themes and parts of this university. I work particularly on the challenges of religion and development with the conviction that the quality of development work will be improved if there is much more integration of both the teachings and the practice of the world's extraordinarily diverse religious institutions. Today we have a special treat, and I will turn this over to Mrs. Patrawan Vechsart, who is the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Thai Embassy. She will give us a brief introduction, but I think we also need to offer our great thanks for the wonderful lunch that the Thai Embassy has organized for us. So she will do a first introduction, and then I will introduce our guests.
The Venerables, Ajahn Pasanno Bhikku, and the Venerable Ajahn Jayanto Bhikku, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a very good opportunity that the two revered monks accept the invitation of the Ambassador of Thailand to the United States of America to come to the DC area. And it is also the good opportunity that we can have the discussion on the Dhamma talk, Dhamma teaching from them. And Ajahn Pasanno Bhikku is a Canadian-born monk, and now he is an abbot at the Apayakiri Buddhist Monastery in the Redwood Valley, California. While Ajahn Jayanto Bhikku is an American-born monk, and now he's an abbot at the Temple Forest Monastery in New Hampshire. I would like to welcome two of the revered monks, and I just would like to mention that discussion will be as a the Dhamma teaching will be used as a guideline principle for our conduct everyday life, for the benefit of our family, our society, our nation, and the world as a whole. As now the world has increased, there is increased conflicts. Conflicts among the nation and today's world. And so that's why today's topic is about the Buddhism, a pathway to peace and conflict resolution. I would like to say very brief to have all of you together in here who have the faith or the belief in the Buddhism to enjoy the Dhamma teaching today. And last but not least, I would like to express the embassy's, on behalf of my ambassador, the sincere thanks to the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs of the University of Georgetown. And also special thanks to Kun Katherine and your staff, or for kindly organizing this kind of event and make it happen today. And I would like to have all of you enjoy the food for thoughts while you already enjoy the food for life. And this is food that is special made and offered by the ambassador's residence. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. As I said, we have several treats in store apart from the lunch. And the plan that we have is that we will turn to our guests who will speak for no later than 1 o'clock. We may have a conversation among ourselves, but with so many of you here, I think we'll give priority to any questions and comments that you have. And we're planning to go until 1:30. So the event is being videotaped and will be on the Berkley Center website and may also be on the websites of our guests, so that if you want to watch it again or if people missed it, it will be available shortly. So very briefly, to expand a little bit on the Deputy Chief of Missions introduction, we have first, the Venerable Ajahn Jayanto, who's the abbot of Temple Forest Monastery in New Hampshire. He was ordained at the Sita Viveka Monastery in the United Kingdom in 1991, and he had trained there for 2 years. And he studied further at the Aruna Ratanagiri Monastery, and then he embarked on a period of practice in Thailand and other Asian Buddhist countries. He returned to the United Kingdom in 2006 and to the United States in 2009, where he founded the Temple Forest Monastery. And he also attended the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He took a meditation class at the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center and residence at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. Venerable Ajahn Pasanno is a well-known and highly respected monk and teacher of Buddhism who spent over 40 years training monks in both Thailand and the United States. He was ordained in Thailand in 1974, later became the abbot of Wat Pa Nanachat International Forest Monastery, ultimately spending 24 years living in Thailand. And under his leadership, Wat Pa Nanachat Monastery developed in physical size and reputation. In the late 1990s, he moved to California to head the new Abhayagiri Monastery, and in 2015, he received the honorary ecclesiastical title, Chao Kun, from the Crown Prince of Thailand on behalf of His Majesty, the King. So you will hear, I hope, more about their story and about their wisdom, but that is a brief introduction to these distinguished guests. So over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to welcome everybody, and as we came in here, started to meet the people that were here and trying to get a sense of who the audience was and what the heck we're doing here anyway. So that was I have no idea what we're doing. So that but the ambassador invited us and set it up, and the opportunity to speak at a prestigious university on something as important as peace and conflict resolution was appealing, and I think quite hopefully useful. The as a say as a Buddhist monk, the teachings lay the foundation for how we live, and the way that we live is actually what conditions the result that we experience, so that learning how to take responsibility for our actions of body, speech, and mind, that's the foundation of what the Buddha actually taught. And people oftentimes ask why we're, say me particularly, or us as Buddhist monks, we're interested in Buddhism and becoming monks, and because especially if you're in Thailand, or Thai people ask, why are you grew up in another faith and another culture, what drew you? And what really drew me was that the feeling that the teachings and the way that it was expressed and lived in Thailand, there's some tools here that really seemed usable, workable, and necessary for living a skillful life. So I wanted to learn those tools. And the teachings of the Buddha are sometimes sometimes it's a bit difficult to get a handle on what the heck is Buddhism anyway, because it and nowadays people are making there's actually a website that sort of Buddhism, like quotes of the Buddha, which are actually not the Buddha at all, but just sort of it's just because everybody's trying to make Buddhism whatever they want it, and you think, well, it's just peace and conflict resolution. That's nice. We'll make it up as we go along. But the Buddha was actually incredibly precise in how we have to go about this problem of the human condition, and one of the foundational teachings, and it was actually the very first teaching that the Buddha gave after his awakening, his enlightenment, is called the Four Noble Truths. And it's the noble truth of suffering, noble truth of the cause of suffering, noble truth of the cessation of suffering, noble truth of the path leading to cessation of suffering. And people hear that and often, wow, what a miserable religion. It's all about suffering. But it's important to recognize that what the Buddha is doing is pointing to a common and universal human problem. We suffer. And that suffering manifests in all sorts of different ways. Discontent, dissatisfaction, stress, there's all sorts of ways that we suffer, and as long as we don't understand that, then we keep trying to find ways, because we're hardwired to prefer to be happy rather than to suffer, and if we don't really address the problem, right off the bat, then we keep covering it over or keep avoiding it in different ways, and it goes on and on. It's it's as if you go to the doctor and the doctor asks you, where does it hurt? And you think, wow, I don't want to know about where it hurts. I want to be better. Or what a negative doctor. He's just thinking about what hurt. But if the doctor doesn't understand where the difficulty is, where the problem is, you don't really have an opportunity for a cure. So similarly in Buddhism, that you have to be willing to look at that, investigate it, and then to say, well, what are the causes? Where does it come from? And then how can I work with it? What do I do? So these are the fundamentals of the Buddhist teachings that we need to be willing to pick up, or to, and it's something that as say in Buddhism, even the word Buddhism is a label that was put on by probably first by the colonial British and trying to describe something that they had. But the Buddha didn't actually teach Buddhism. The Buddha taught the way of understanding this human problem and how to relieve it, how to find relief from that. So when we come back to these tools, and they're fundamental, most people can understand that in the sense that there needs to be a foundation of moral responsibility. There needs to be a cultivation of clarity and awareness. There needs to be the cultivation of discernment and reflection, investigation. Without that willingness to investigate and reflect and to create a skill in discernment, then we get confused. Even if we're intelligent, I can remember I lived and trained with a very well-known teacher in Thailand, and he was not a scholar. In fact, he was put a lot of. One of the things he kept telling us to do is put down the books, learn how to read your heart, and that was really difficult because we love to have ideas, we love to know what we're doing, we love to get a game plan of what this, get a handle on this knowledge, and just the experience of sitting, say and in this case in a forest in Thailand, in a meditation hut, and having to be with ourselves was suffering. So that in order to understand human suffering, we've got to understand our own suffering. And we have to be, because otherwise it becomes theoretical. And also similarly, if we have a theory of others, or if we don't understand our own suffering, then it's very difficult to empathize with others. So that the time that one takes to learn about one's own suffering is learning about the human condition and realizing that what we're learning is actually applicable to really everybody. Not in a specific way, but this is it gives you the tools to tune in. And again, that sense of our propensity to to have theories or to come up with rational ideas of how things should be and idealize how the world should be, we can complicate things with that. And so I think one of the things that Buddhism can do, and Buddhist practice, is give us the ability to step back and get us the tools to be able to understand ourselves and others. And I can remember our teacher in Thailand. Sometimes he'd get bemused by sort of how intelligently and how wanting to understand philosophically about Buddhism, or trying to do a comparison of this to that, and I remember one time he just kind of bemused, and he said, "Oh, you Westerners, you're like vultures. Vultures fly really high, but look what they come down to eat." And it was really, like having high ideas, high ideals, but where does our mind go? Where does our heart go? Where do our speech and actions, where do they end up? And it's really, that's one of the characteristic of some of these, say, my own teacher, and many of the teachers who are meditation masters, forest teachers, they're not teaching from the scriptures. They're teaching from their own experience. It's not that they don't know anything, but oftentimes they'll set it aside in order to get back to the roots. And I think that's what's helpful for us as human beings. So how do we get back to the roots of our own difficulty, our own complications, and get a sense of how to work with that? As one does that, it isn't as if it just works in a monastery. Because I lived in Thailand for 23, 24 years, and I was the abbot of a monastery there for 15 years. And during that time, one of the things that, say, within a Thai culture, if you're an abbot of a monastery, then you're already an integral part of the community that you live in. And this is something that is, I think, particularly the Southern school of Buddhism that I'm in, and the say Thai culture itself is a monastery. Like a monastery is very much within the web and the fabric of the society and the culture around it. Some things that the Buddha laid down institutionalized that, like can't have money, can't store food, can't cook food. What do? You rely on what is given to you, and so that when you rely on what is given to you, you form these relationships with people, and it's we rely on the community around us for our material well-being, and the community relies on the monasteries for spiritual well-being. And when I was there, then some of the things that I ended up doing, got involved in some community development, got involved in some protection of forest areas that were being threatened, and 2 particular areas that had established small hermitages in, and they were in areas that the forest was really being threatened. And again, it's sort of like, well, it's a nice idea to protect forests, but if people don't have, if they don't have a livelihood, they don't have good health care, they don't have water, good ideas don't really take you very far. So that you have to think through, how do you provide the well-being of those people? And so that's some of the things that I got involved. And you have to pay attention to what are the particular situations that are there. What are the people like? What are the forces at play? So you really have to pay attention to what are you working with? What are the underlying problems? Where is the suffering? And learning how to pay attention to that in order to say, well, what would be a solution? So that in some places there you rely on because we're protecting forest, then creating. We were the very first place that was allowed to establish a community forest within a national park, and never been done before. And they thought it was really nuts. But the villagers were on board because it was their forest then. And because the forests were being cut not so much by the locals, they were doing the work, but they were getting paid by merchants from the city, from outside. So you have to pay attention, where's the money coming from? And you have to figure that out. And what resources do they have? So one of the places was along the Mekong River. And every year the Mekong River goes up really high in the monsoon season and drops down. And so that the soil along the banks of the river is extraordinarily rich. And it's renewed every year. So you know what, if we planted cotton, because cotton, one of the things that cotton is, in anywhere else, any other situation, it's highly intensive use of fertilizers and pesticides. And it's not environmentally friendly, and it's not, and the ways that it's done, it's probably never been documented, but the health of the actual villagers is really compromised by the amount of pesticides that they use. And so that, if we look at that, they could be planting cotton, and then you start training them to create dyes from the forest, so they're naturally dyed, train them how to sew, get some commercial sewing machines, and you get a communal group of people making things out of it. And you start a whole, where they're making a lot more money rather than just supplying a raw material. And so that the village was able to stabilize their own inner economy and establish a sense of well-being and communal responsibility. So those are things that because there's one of the fundamentals that the Buddha laid down as a model is the Sangha, as monastic Sangha, ordained Sangha is a model. And one of the things that the Buddha kept emphasizing over and over again are laying the foundations for communal harmony. And because if there's not communal harmony, then spiritual practice is difficult, and general well-being is so that. But it's also a model for others, and so that how to lay a foundation for communal harmony is really essential. So I started thinking, well, I'll talk for about 15 minutes. I've gone on too long and haven't given Ajahn Jayanto an opportunity to speak. So I think we should be we're sharing the platform here, so to share the mic.
Happy for you to continue if you'd like to, Limpo. Yes, Limpo covered a lot of the bases that that would come to my mind as well on this subject. I feel like, probably in this room, many of you have had or have backgrounds which train you with skills which are really essential and useful in the field of conflict resolution, and in ways that are sophisticated and sensitive and applicable, that we as Buddhist monks may not have, and yet as Ajahn Pasanno was just speaking, sometimes just actual situations on the ground, if we are coming from our experience and responding directly. Can you hear me now? So yes, if we, many of you may have an education which we don't have in these areas of conflict resolution, and the skills that I think I've read and heard and have spoken with people that are being developed today by people such as yourselves and others with whom you're probably working are very valuable, and I feel sort of almost like it'd be hard to see what to offer in the area of specifics. And yet, as Ajahn Pasanno has just been describing, that when we do respond directly to the people and situation right in front of us from a place of feeling a kinship, feeling a sense of empathy for the people, and knowing that we're no different, that we're really we're all in the same boat. In Buddhism, this focus on coming to recognize and then understand one's own suffering is not just in order to free one's own heart, but it enables a kind of relationship and community with the people around one, which otherwise we're numb to. Like the high ideals that we all can have, we've no doubt all met, and perhaps we've even embodied ourselves. Examples of speaking very, very true and high ideals and truths and thoughts, and yet at the same time acting in a way which is against or not in line with those ideals, and not even realizing it. So a lot about the Buddhist approach, from my perspective, would be finding what is useful, and the kinds of skills developed at institutions like this and others in the world are really essential parts of that. And yet always staying in touch with where one is now, in the present moment, in terms of one's emotional reality, in terms of one's mental reality, in terms of one's physical reality. So we emphasize a lot of developing a kind of self-awareness, which is as much as possible free from bias, free from thought, from philosophy, even from belief. So as Buddhists, we're not trying to cultivate a certain kind of belief, a Buddhist belief, and then see the world and relate to the world from that belief system. And we're certainly not trying to get others to follow a Buddhist belief system, but we're trying to see belief itself, the mind taking on a belief structure for what it is, and not just blindly falling for it. Even our own ideas of what's right and what's wrong, but knowing that yes, this is how it seems. Yes, this is how I perceive things, and it's actually unsure. And what is sure is right now, in this moment, I'm here and you're here, and we can have a relationship. And there's a choice that we each have where we're going to come from in the moment with each other and with ourselves. So we try to be very careful in, first of all, recognizing our own states of mind, states of how our thoughts work, how we speak, how we act, how we react, our emotional worlds. First to recognize that and become clear about it, and then to slowly start to understand it. And this is what Ajahn Pasanno was starting off by saying, the heart of the Buddhist teaching. Really, it's not about trying to make anybody Buddhist. The Buddha never really created a religion called Buddhism, just offered a way for each of us to discover for ourselves the reality of how we are with ourselves, how we are with each other. When I've been, I've had far less experience in communal situations than Ajahn Pasanno has, and the few examples that I can think of myself where I've been involved in the need for conflict resolution communally, say in society, they reflect the usual kinds of conflicts that I have with just individuals in the monastery with whom I'm living. If we go down to the heart of it, I think probably all of us have seen perhaps that the roots of the conflicts have to do with the same things which are driving our own desires, our own wishes, our own fears, the forces that the Buddha pointed to. You could say it's sometimes pointed as greed and hatred and delusion, but that basic force of I want, and I don't want, and being confused, being deluded, having a particular view. So this is something we try to recognize in ourselves, and in that way we see that we're no different than anyone else. Even people who are so lost, they're creating terrible harm and suffering to others. It doesn't mean that in having compassion for them and trying to show kindness for them, we don't also need to put them behind bars sometimes. You need to be practical and protective of people in whatever situation we're facing. And yet all of us could kill if we were confused enough. All of us could do something terrible, just like the people perhaps caught in the conflicts that we're trying to address. And for me, it's very important to recognize that first, to really see that I'm no different than any of these people. And then perhaps in addressing and speaking with them, they sense that. They sense that we're not coming from a patronizing position of being superior and having the answer and trying to help them sort their problem out, but as a fellow human being. And we're all caught in the same problem. We're just in different situations. There's this phrase in Thailand sometimes used, which on the face of it again can sound sort of negative, but the essence of it brings us together, which is that we're all brothers and sisters in suffering. We all have loves and we all have fears. We all have the experience of joy and pain, and all of us are caught in different ways, large and small. And in recognizing this first, when we approach whatever situation we're trying to approach, it really helps. So those are a few words. I won't go on much longer because I'd like to open up for questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, I would suggest that we open this up, but I'm going to do something perhaps a little unfair, which is to call on Susan Hayward, who's a co-sponsor, just to situate this a little bit. She's at the U.S. Institute of Peace, working in the religion department, and has very extensive experience working with Buddhist communities at the moment. And maybe you could just start us off with either questions or comments. So Susan, right there. They'll get you a mic.
Thank you very much for your comments and your insights. A lot of times what I find is that I work with Buddhist communities in South and Southeast Asia, as well as with Abrahamic traditions around the world. And there's often a great deal of emphasis in all the traditions, but in the Dharmic faiths and Buddhism in particular, on cultivating inner peace as not just a first step, but in some ways as the only necessary step for then creating external peace in the world. And I wonder, because personally for me, as a student in particular of both Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism, I have struggled a little bit with what is the relationship between the cultivation of inner peace through meditation practices and so on, as well as the acts of compassion that are shown to those in the community, the external actions of peace. And to use a term, a jargon that we use in the peace building field, the sequencing of the internal reflection, the internal work to cultivate peace, and some of those external actions and the relationships between them, which there can be a little bit of a different emphasis within Theravada and Mahayana on that. And I think about that especially as somebody who's coming from the U.S. Institute of Peace, as Katherine mentioned. I'm involved a great deal in situations of violent conflict in working with Buddhist monks, Buddhist nuns, Buddhist lay people who are living in the midst of violence. And as you rightly said, it's when there's situations, not just the development needs of poverty and so on, but when you're living in a situation of violence that's taking place, loss that's taking place, very real suffering, not just psychological suffering, but very real physical suffering, emotional suffering that's taking place, that makes this question even more pressing of the relationship and the sequencing and the effect between the inner cultivation of peace and the external work to build a kind of peace that allows people even the space to be able to meditate and practice and so on. So I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on that, and thinking especially about that for those who are living in, a Myanmar or a Sri Lanka or a place where there's violence taking place right now. Thank you.
Okay, big question. But that, I think I think they have to go hand in hand, really, and it's it's not really separate things, but it's because sometimes it's sort of, well, I've got to really get my mind peaceful, my heart really stable before I can engage in the world, or we've got to get things sorted out so that I can have a peaceful enough situation in order to be peaceful. But I think they rely on each other, and it's through the willingness to bring it back to the experience and an experiential realm of what's happening. How does it affect me? How does it affect others? And so that. And of course, there's also going to be, different people are going to be drawn in different ways. I mean, there's people who are, who tend to be more inward oriented, and there's going to be people who are more action oriented. And to encourage each and give each other the encouragement to cultivate both those areas of peace. And when we work internally in terms of trying to establish a sense of clarity and stability within the heart, the reality is our actions and the actions of others resonate. I mean, that's the human heart is. That's part of its function is to resonate and to feel, and so that learning how to not push away the things that do create a sense of, because some things you don't want to see in oneself or you don't want to experience, but you have to be willing to approach it, and that's where, of course, that's where it comes into needing an external stability to a certain degree, where one can feel safe enough to approach some of those areas where there is fear, or there is anger, or there is a lack of forgiveness. But it's you start realizing that it's just in these that willingness to at least keep stepping forward. I can remember one of the instructions that my own teacher gave, and this is go forward, don't retreat. And that can be a, how do you say, you can take that as an ideology, but there is a sense of being willing to push the envelope of where our comfort zone is, and and you have to be careful as well. Because again, this is not black and white. This part of Buddhist practice is getting really comfortable with gray areas, and that drives us nuts. So that sense of that wanting clarity, wanting stability, wanting to know what's right and who's right, and saying, well, who's wrong? What's wrong? Think, well, hey, wait a minute here. Where is it coming from? How are we doing it? How can we go forward? And that's where a certain element of that communal harmony is really important, because you can't do this on your own. You have to do it in relationship with others. It's like the idea of sort of a solitary hermit, or really living a life of spiritual release is. I haven't ever seen that. I don't see that modeled. I don't see it lived. I see people have different temperaments, but there's always, the reality is, as human beings, we're always in relationship with each other, and learning how to be skillful within those relationships.
Thank you. And let's open it up. If everyone could raise your hand so we can see who has a question, and if you could introduce yourselves. Okay, back there. I can't even see your face.
That's okay. A quick question, though. This has all been very positive, but there's also...
Could you introduce, just say...
Okay,
introduce
but there's
yourself.
also the violence against the Rohingya in Burma that has to come up and be addressed. How do you reconcile that?
Oh, well, I mean, what do you mean? Do I have to find some excuse for it? I mean, no. I mean, there's no... It's violence is violence. It needs to be addressed. There might be some sort of historical reason, but that doesn't, or societal reason, but that's an excuse. It's not really something that, in terms of resolution, you have to deal with the reality that there is suffering, and it's human beings creating suffering, and it's human beings that have to resolve it.
Other questions? Yes, right here. Can we get the mic here?
Hello, I'm Chaplain Johnson. What is your response to the relationship between Buddhism and liberation theology?
Liberation theology. I'm afraid that I'm not very knowledgeable. I don't have the knowledge I've been spending my time in forest monasteries in Thailand, been spending my time in forest monasteries in California, and I don't have the knowledge and experience. I assume, one of the things that I have been exposed to since coming to America is there's been an intermonastic dialogue that's been taking place, and different Buddhist monastics and different Christian monastics, mostly, of course, within the Catholic Church, but mostly Benedictine, and so that there's I think in my mind, say like a liberation theology, with not knowing what the nuances of that term are is that those should be two terms that go together. In the sense of paying attention to what is it that allows us to actually be liberated from the things that are constraining and creating a sense of suffering, and a theology, a respect for the divine that embraces that. So that's just off the top of my head.
Well, right here.
Yes, what's the relationship between Buddhism and the state? I mean, Buddhists are in a lot of different states, but they're in some places where they are probably the majority of a country are Buddhists, and others where they aren't. I mean, how does Buddhism relate to the state?
I think one of the, say, historically, and I can only speak for, say, Theravada school, Southern school, and my own experience of Thailand, that there is Buddhism is given a place of non-engagement in the state. We don't vote, we don't hold political office, and any monk who starts to get involved in political process or agitating in that way will tend to be criticized and ostracized very, very quickly. And that being said, they're seen as a resource for advice and consulting of what would be a skillful way. So there's an informal relationship with the state, but not a direct and binding one. So there's a balance that really needs to be maintained, because once a religion becomes bound up with say state and state policies, then it loses its autonomy and its ability to have have say spiritual gravitas.
Maybe building a little on that, could you tell us a little bit about what you mean by the forest monasteries and how that might relate to engaged Buddhism, which is also, I know, something that comes out of the Thai tradition?
Yeah, in general, in Buddhist traditions, and particularly in Thailand, but I think it's probably both in different traditions as well as historically. There's always your majority of monasteries tend to be in the cities and the towns, and tend to be engaged in either ceremony, ritual, study, academics, and then there's a forest tradition, which is usually a smaller minority, and their emphasis tends to be on meditation, simplicity, certain austerity, and an adherence to the ways of training or discipline, rules of discipline that have been laid down at the time of the Buddha, so that they're a small minority that does have a certain inspirational element within the culture, and one of the things that when I first went to Thailand, I didn't really know that much about Buddhism. I didn't think I was interested, and I certainly didn't have any interest in being a Buddhist monk. I mean, that was way beyond the pale. But in going and seeing forest monasteries and seeing the relationship between the monastery and the effect that it had on the culture around it and the society, and the interaction that happened all the time in a very informal way, but very engaged. That was one of the big inspirations of becoming a monk. Saying, "Oh, that's something I could really do that would be of benefit." And there is this term of engaged Buddhism, and you'll find that many of the similar to what I just said, right? You're in a monastery and you're living with people, and you see their lives affect you, and you see how it affects everything about their lives, and you're motivated to help because you see that you've got on a certain level you've got the clout as a respected figure, and then people want to help monasteries so that you've got resources that you can redirect for the benefit of others. So it's quite organic and natural, and but it has an effect. And there is a need, going back to your first question, there is a need to also not to be entangled in the state, because it's a you compromise yourself, and you compromise the trust that you have with others when you do that. It isn't that you don't have anything to do with the state, but it's like you really need to be careful. But it's I think again it comes back to a lot of this sort of organic and natural quality that really appealed to me in Thailand. Oh, there was one of our monks in our community. He comes from a extremely wealthy family, and from a very is from Asian background, Malaysian, Thai, grown up in England, fluent in I don't know how many languages, and then he decided to ordain. He got interested, and his father was absolutely aghast, and so why he was only son as well, and saying, "Why are you doing this?" The idea of having my son involved in organized religion, and he said, as his response was, "Oh, don't worry, Dad. Thai Buddhism is not organized." So it's.
Other questions?
I'd like to hear the other Ajahn speak to those questions.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, Ajahn Pasanno really spoke well, I thought. The the first question about how does the inner work translate to the outer work of actually addressing real problems that are happening now in society. And there are many images that could come to mind, but it's like we all have our place in addressing a problem which is complex, because we're different people, and if a ship was sinking, and it was really filling with water, everyone would have to bail that water out. And if there's a leak, some are having to bail out, but it's useful for some to be learning how to make parts of the ship that don't leak. And so when we have these problems that really stem from the same roots of people breaking their moral integrity, hurting each other, hurting themselves, stealing, acting from greed, hatred, and delusion, then it really does, I feel, directly address the problem, although not as an immediate way, to be trying to, first of all, oneself, learn how to be free from those influences of greed, hatred, delusion, and also help others to learn that too. So I feel like being a Buddhist monk in a peaceful monastery in New Hampshire, I'm doing radical social action, even though I'm not allowed to do kind of political action. Like Luang Por was saying, it's actually very important. We don't. We could do something political in the sense of, say, sit quietly in a peaceful, say, a peace protest, like a response of just practicing meditation in the face of the country going to war, or something like that, perhaps. But we would never declare for a political candidate or get involved in temporal politics in that way, even if we personally may have feelings on the matter, both to protect the monastic order from being caught up in those affairs, and but also importantly to be available for everyone. Whatever their beliefs, or you're always available for everyone on these really direct issues of what we all share, how we get caught by greed, hatred, and delusion in all the myriad ways that happens. So I see us as providing an example which should be one that points to a different way of not acting from those destructive places in our minds, and learning how to find the kind of happiness which doesn't depend on necessarily getting what we want materially. And yet, as someone else pointed out, it doesn't always work that way. I mean, that is what it's supposed to, that is what we're trying to do, and yet we're all human beings. And so even these days we see in the news, it's terribly painful and ugly to see people dressed in the same robes we have and doing violence. I mean, this has been very upsetting, and yet it's not surprising fundamentally, because, as Ajahn Pasanno says, we're all human beings, and so those will be some people who are so deluded themselves. In fact, they're not technically monks if they've done anything which has intentionally resulted in the death of another. Our rules are such that immediately you're not a monk anymore. You might still be be wearing the robes. And so this is true. You know, I often think when people say, well, look at all the harm that religious people are doing in the world, you know, or have sort of been behind religions. And I think, well, yes, but you could say that about, look at all the harm non-religious people are doing in the world. If you don't, you could pick any example and say, look, that person doesn't have religion, and look what they're doing. You need religion. And it's neither makes sense. You know, one has to just look at the individual. I do. Some of you, or many of you, may have read. There was a book years ago, the autobiography and biography by June Chung, I think was her name, of a woman, Chinese woman who grew up. It was the biography of her grandmother and her mother, and her own autobiography, the story of her family, which spanned the modern history of China in the 20th century, and it was really fascinating account, first-person account. Her grandmother had been born a concubine with bound feet. Her mother was right up there with Mao in the sort of as a captain of the revolution, and she and her husband, the author's father, became high officials in one of the, I think it was Sichuan province, if I'm not mistaken, right at the very beginning of after the communist revolution. And what struck me was the ideals they had, which were true. They really, really thought, okay, no more corruption. Now it's fair. No more torture. All of those practices are out. And within 7 years or so, the same kind of corruption, even the same tortures, were all coming right back in, even though the ideals had changed. They'd stripped. In that case, it wasn't necessarily religious ideology, but it was the traditional Confucian monarchist ideology. And it was a different ideology. And yet the human heart had not been cured of the same forces which bring us into those problems. So I see, you know, any individual, not just monasteries or needing to call oneself Buddhist, but anyone who takes these teachings and practices up for oneself, if we're really working at this in our hearts, whatever religion we are or no religion, then we are helping. We're really helping to solve the problems that are coming up in the world. It just may not be as directly as we need. And then sometimes we really do need to, you know, the ship is sinking right now, and so let's also get out there and pick up the pails. And so you will see monks helping in, you know, disaster areas or getting involved in community situations like Ajahn Pasanno was also describing.
Okay, and I see some hands, so let's go back there. We are coming towards the end, so why don't we take a couple of questions?
Thank you very much. My name is Ken Dante, and I worked as a therapist. Part of the time was with people that were addicted. Yes, hello? Can you hear me? Yeah. Part of the time I worked with people that were addicted, so I'm very tuned into violence and toxin. And of course, where there's violence, there's trauma, and wounds often get infected. So we have a poisoning, I would even say, I'll use the word soul loosely, but a poisoning of the soul of the inner being. How does one work with that toxin when it's a very strong toxin? And of course, when it is very strong, it goes into violence, whether it's systematic or on a cultural level, like groups of monks, for that example, where that gets fanned. How specifically do you work when there is a deep inner toxin?
So let me see, are there any other questions? Do you want to, let's...
This is just a silly question. You're both wearing robes, but they're different colors. Is that because you're different? Is this just stylistic or?
Okay, and right behind you.
My question is, how is Buddhism in higher education as a chaplaincy in Thailand? And how do you deal with minority religious groups?
Okay, well, a couple of easy questions.
So the first one then, or? Okay.
The toxins.
The toxins. Well, the robes
And
is
the
easy.
chaplaincy.
The robes, they as long as they're in the same range of colors, we're all right. And so actually, in Thailand, this doesn't signify anything. Even though Ajahn Pasanno is a lot more senior than me, and yet the way that we in the Buddha left it with the monastic order, that seniority is determined simply by length of time as a monk. So I'm the most senior in my monastery, but that's only because I've been a monk longer than the others. The others may be wiser than me, but they'll still bow to me. We'll have all the same. So it points that way. And the color of the robes, we dye them with jackfruit dye in Thailand. Here we use some chemical dyes, and so yeah, there's a difference there. Oh, that's a jackfruit. Well, there you are. His is a jackfruit dye. Mine's a chemical. Yeah. And with the toxin question, it's a hard one, and it does mean that some people may not really be in a place where coming into, say, a monastery is going to be beneficial to them. They may have need help in other ways first, and I think a lot of the say rehab centers and say psychotherapy, psychology work that's being done these days there's really a lot of good and necessary work that is hopefully available to individuals on that level, and that may be necessary. We traditionally in a monastery you might have somebody come in who really has deep needs in that way, and if it's possible for them to live harmoniously in the monastery without causing harm to others, then it can be the case that we'll say, especially in Thailand, where there's just a lot more monasteries and the society kind of holds it around. It's a little different for us now in the States. But you can have that person live and just help in the monastery and start to heal in their own way without much specific intervention. Like meditation practices may not be helpful, especially concentration practices. They may just simply need the experience of living with people who are not going to take advantage of them, living, in a place where nobody is doing any drink or drugs, where there's some austerity that comes in. They learn some self-discipline, gain some self-respect, and that's actually the basis of our own any monks or any Buddhists. Life of practice is starting with a safe and kind of moral foundation, and then just seeing let the heart heal naturally. But there have been cases where people who are really needy and say coming from strong addiction just are too damaged to be able not to create harm somehow, even just to the harmony in the monastery, and we feel like that would be bad for them. And so there are people we can sometimes direct them towards, and sometimes it's just not the right time for them. And there was another easy one, but that one for you. Chaplaincy. And the chaplaincy, how does it relate to in Thailand?
Yes. How do Buddhists minister to students in college, as here at Georgetown or any other regular college? And
higher education.
Will those chaplaincies connect to, say, Muslim chaplaincies, minority groups, Christian chaplaincies, minority groups in Thailand?
It is a good question. I am actually going to hand it over to you because you've had 15 years as an abbot in Thailand, and I'm not actually sure. I have some ideas myself.
Educational institution, something like that, right?
Yeah, campus ministers.
Yeah, we have a couple of schoolers,
Well,
just like Wat Mahathat, which is the
yes.
and then,
Yeah, there's a couple of institutes of higher education in Thailand, Buddhist universities where they receive training and are given some skills both in terms of theoretical and experientially. Also. Aspects I'm thinking, especially with Buddhist chaplains, like sometimes when you're a monk, you're already in a position of teaching or ministering to others, and you would be invited to go off. And that's another aspect is that, say, as Buddhist monks, we really have to be invited to go someplace to teach or to help. But within the Thai culture, then you've got. I'm thinking of like chaplains that are trained. It's like in the military, you've got oftentimes it's former monastics who have an education, and then they would be that is a way that they serve within the culture. So there's but that it comes out of those education institutes, both in terms of the university as well as the ecclesiastical and religious education that they receive.
Do you have any last comment on the role of interreligious, the minorities, or?
Right. I spent all of my time up in the Northeast, which is incredibly homogeneous and monochromatic, so that there's and I think it's in the south of Thailand that there is a lot more interaction between the Buddhist monasteries and say the Muslim communities. I'm thinking of a very well-known and highly respected teacher in Thailand, Ajahn Buddhadasa. He was a teacher, leader, and he went on this very long pilgrimage to India and only had one layperson accompany him, and that was a Muslim man who accompanied him to India. They went for like 7 or 8 months traveling in India together, and it was really a shared experience of being in India. Also, a good example is somebody I just met last month, a former foreign minister of Thailand, who Dr. Surin Pitsuwan. He was the person who advocated for, he was the head of ASEAN for a while, he was a foreign minister of Thailand, and he advocated for, say, Visakha Puja, the day of the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and passing, to be an internationally accepted United Nations Day. But he grew up as a Muslim, but was educated in Buddhist monasteries. So there's a lot of interaction. But I don't know that it's formalized. Again, this is where, Thai Buddhism is not organized.
Well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank all of you for being a wonderful audience, and the people who are standing are really noble. It's a real demonstration. You've caused us to run out of chairs. So thank you all. I'm left certainly with the strong teachings of Buddhism, a reminder, and both in your words, but also in your comportment and in your philosophy that you've expressed. There are 2 of your metaphors that will certainly keep me thinking. I'm still contemplating the vulture flying from above and the gap between our ideals and what we see, and then the metaphor of the leaking ship and the need for a division of labor, both trying to stop the ship from sinking, but also from thinking about why it's leaking and looking ahead to make sure that the ships in the future will be more soundly built. So I think you've given us a wonderful taste of the way in which you have approached that. So thank you again to the Thai Embassy for the feast that we were provided, both intellectually and in terms of the meal. And thank you both very much for sharing your wisdom and your ideas. So.